She was the person you'd wake up to when you flipped on the morning news.
Rich in Texas is behind bars this morning after being caught on camera stealing her neighbor's Christmas lights. Who thinks of that?
That's part of her resume reel that's still on YouTube. She was the face and voice that viewers trusted, but now in a shocking turn of events, this former news anchor is now an accused murderer.
This morning at 7:51 hours, officers responded to a stabbing call in the 1500 block of East Crowley.
She allegedly stabbed to death the person you might least expect, and police say she stabbed that victim multiple times. However, there appears to be a defense that she's going with. What she is saying her side of the story is to this horrific crime. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. All right, guys, before we get into this shocking case we're following out of Wichita, Kansas, and we begin this episode of On the Case, I want to take a moment and talk about our partner and sponsor for this episode, a great app. It's called Upside. It gets you cash back when you buy daily essentials like gas and groceries. Now, Upside, it is free. It's easy to use. I actually use it a lot when I go and pump gas. It also works at a 7-Eleven, even Taco Bell. And the biggest thing we're talking about here is real cash back. So after you spend, money appears in your Upside account that you can transfer straight to your bank. So here's what you do. Download Upside. It's free. You buy whatever you plan to purchase. You pay as usual with your debit or your credit card. Then you file a claim in the app and you get money right back. So to find out how much you could save with Upside, click the link in the description or scan the QR code on your screen and use our promo code OTC to get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. All right, let's dive into this story here. Morning news anchors, they kind of have that perfect persona, don't they? Right? You flip on the news, it's super early, sun might not be up, but they always have the energy. They always seem to be on top of whatever's going on in your community. And it makes what happens in this story so shocking. And we're following it out of Wichita, Kansas, and it involves a former morning news anchor who's now an accused murderer. This is Angie Mock. According to her LinkedIn, she used to work in local news for more than a decade. And that's the kind of job, I mean, I used to be in the industry. It might seem glamorous on the outside, but boy, it is a grind and it takes years of dedication, takes a lot of commitment and sacrifice. And apparently, Mock was someone who did pay her dues in the business. Her career started in November 2002. She was a sports reporter, started out at that small market station, tiny Lincoln, Nebraska, and it appears she really worked her way up through places like Rochester, Minnesota, Missoula, Montana, Oklahoma City, and then she made it to the biggest place she worked, St. Louis. She was a morning anchor in that city from March of 2011 through February of 2015. But in 2015, it appears, she got out of the business and transitioned into software sales. Now, along the way, she did seem to have a ton of support from her family, especially her mom, a woman named Anita Avers. Avers worked as a clinical and family therapist in Wichita. Her biography reads that she specializes in treating adults experiencing depression, anxiety, spectrum disorders, trauma, and mood disorders, as well as relationship issues involving couples and marriages like family conflict, infidelity, and divorce. So she was a woman who really handled a lot of very serious issues involving mental health. And it also just appears that she was, at the end of the day, a proud mom of her daughter. In fact, her profile picture right now is her daughter, Angie Mock, and it appears Angie's out live in the field reporting. And this is a picture of the two of them together. This was posted in 2019. Now, a family therapist, a morning news anchor, a mother, and a daughter. Those details just make what happened on October 31st, according to Wichita police, just so difficult to comprehend.
This morning at 7:51 hours, officers responded to a stabbing call in the 1500 block of East Crowley. When officers arrived on scene, they were met in the street with a 48-year-old white female who had suffered from some cuts to her hand. Officers went inside the residence, found an 81-year-old elderly female suffering from multiple stab wounds. Both were transported to local hospitals.
Police say Angie Mock, the former cheerful morning news anchor, killed her own mother, stabbing her multiple times. So here's what we know about what the scene looked like. There's a neighbor that told the local news station KAKE that Mock allegedly ran up to her and her boyfriend. This is what she said. That neighbor said, quote, "There was a woman who approached our vehicle with blood like her hands were filled. Her body was filled with blood, asking to call 911. Just think of how terrifying a situation that would be if you were just driving down the street and that person comes up to you. But that neighbor said that Mock then took their cell phone and ran into the house, calling 911. She described Mock as acting scared. Now, Mock's mom, who you do see her hugging in this picture, Anita Avers, was rushed to the hospital. She was the victim, 81 years old. She passed away from multiple stab wounds, allegedly at the hands of her own daughter. Now here's Mock's mugshot. Her full name is Angeline. She's 47 years old and she was taken into custody on first-degree murder charges. Now we did find the 911 dispatch chatter from when Mock called for help, and we do get a little bit of insight, a little bit of information about what Mock's side of the story may be. Listen to this.
Well, you're responding to the cutting at 1514 East Crowley Street. The calling party is advised that on Friday 01 CP, the calling party stabbed her mom. The mother started slicing at CP and the calling party had to stab the mother to save herself. The mother is a white female, 5'9" heavy build, standoff on arrival. Would you like an attack channel?
So that's the dispatch chatter. And the key part of what you're hearing there is that the dispatcher says that the 911 caller, who is Angie Mock, said something along the lines of needing to allegedly stab her mom to save herself. So could that mean that she is arguing that this was a case of self-defense? Both Mock and her mom were taken to the hospital. Police say Mock did have cuts on her hands. It's unclear if those cuts are defensive wounds. It's also unclear if Mock and her mom, if they were dealing with any mental health issues or if the two had any previous issues between each other. Now, we weren't able to find any previous criminal history for Mock. It seems that her record up until this point was relatively clean, but Mock now is currently being held on $1 million bond in the county jail in Kansas, and this case is now in the criminal justice system. So many people who watch Mock on TV, as you can imagine, they're reacting to the news in shock. Now, there is that big question of whether Mock murdered her mom with premeditation, which is what first-degree murder is in Kansas, or was this truly an act of self-defense? And in the word of dispatchers, is it something that Mock had to do to save herself? Joining us now to talk more about this is retired NYPD Detective David Sarney. It's always great to have you on Law and Crime, especially when we break down some of these stories where, you know, if you're an officer responding to this, you're just taking in a lot of information right out of the gate. Let's talk a little bit about, you get this call, you know that there was a stabbing of some kind. I mean, what's going on in the car as you're arriving on the scene and what happens next?
Well, thank you for having me. What you're having is 911 gets called. 911 dispatcher will then send it over to the dispatcher. The 911 call center will call the dispatch. Dispatch then sends out the radio run to the officers on scene who are going there. They're going to be asking for further information if there's anything more that they have on this, weapons on scene, all this information, and hopefully that's been relayed from the 911 operator to dispatch, and then the officers will get to scene. And it's an active scene at this point because once the phone call is actually coming from one of the, at this time, possible victims. Later on, we find out it's going to be the perpetrator. So you're going to have to make sure, you know, you're going to get the information immediately from the one person who's actually observed everything. There's also a 911 persons that were there who saw the incident, or basically initial incident. You're going to separate them at least as best you can, and get and render aid as soon as possible to the victim at this time, and the other victim that you found out is going to be in the bedroom. So everyone is going to pretty much get EMS there as soon as possible. And if you can render aid immediately or some sort of aid yourself, you'll do that.
And I know in this case, excuse me, Angie Mock's mom, the victim in this story, she was rushed to the hospital. She had been stabbed multiple times. She's taken to the hospital. Sadly, she loses her life. From an investigative standpoint, I don't know if there's a right way to ask this question, but the fact that they have to move her from where she was on the bed, EMS, to try to get her to the hospital, is that a challenge for the investigation where you won't be able to see what position she was in other than it's been reported that she's been left in the bed?
Right, and that's where the interviews, when you do these investigative steps, you have so many people you're going to be interviewing, and one of them is going to be the officers on scene, the first responders. What did they see? Where was the mother in the bed, and how was she situated? Was she in bed like she was sleeping, or was she in bed as in that she fell into the bed? You know, if the officers have body cameras, that's also beneficial. That's always a thing that we utilize a lot, is that, whatever footage they have, especially this is a live active scene, if there's body camera footage, we utilize that, so that's another positive there. So each step of this investigation, you're going to see a lot of it. Again, a lot of wheels are in motion at this point. So you have what you have. You have two injured parties, and what's going to happen as far as investigation is going to be concerned is how did they get injured? And that's what the detectives will figure out. And not only that, how were they injured? Who did it? Where's the weapon? And why did it happen?
Well, and let's talk a little bit about Angie Mock, this suspect, because it appears that she's going with a self-defense argument, but she's also facing first-degree murder, which in Kansas would be premeditation. What kind of evidence might law enforcement have for within a couple of days to say that this is what we're going to be charging her with?
That's going to be the statements made by the defendant at this time prior to being arrested. When she spoke to the dispatcher, all of these pieces will come together in that puzzle. But that's why the officers can make the arrest. We arrest on probable cause, and the prosecutor then determines the fact whether or not those charges were either reduced or upgraded. And at this point, they've upgraded to murder one, presuming this is premeditated. Because now you have to realize the relation between the mother-daughter. Was the mother and daughter living together? These are things that come another part of that. So each piece of this comes in, and it's amazing the fact that they do murder one immediately. And usually there's I'm waiting, maybe there's going to be additional charges, or they may have a reduction in the charge from murder one to say manslaughter or murder two. So that's going to come out later on, but they're keeping it the highest charge right now. So they believe they have enough to prosecute this beyond a reasonable doubt.
And for her, she makes this statement that, it appears it's a self-defense argument, something along the lines of, I had to do it to save myself. And I don't know if there's a mental health challenge that's going on. I'm not sure. How do you determine, considering there were two people that know what happened and one of them's dead, how do you know, as the people investigating this, whether this was self-defense or not?
Well, we look, as far as investigators, we look to find out the whys, and that's where people have this, what we call the culpable mental state. Was it intentional? And was it accidental? It doesn't seem to be that way. Was it reckless? Was it, knowingly doing this? These are coming into play, but with murder one, it's intentional. So we're looking to find evidence to show the intent of the individual, and that's usually the hardest to prove. So that's why they're going to do it again, a deep dive into the defendant at this point via social media, any domestic incident reports they've had in the past, talk to neighbors, talk to friends, to see if there was some sort of acrimony between them, that relationship. Because the self-defense is what the prosecutor is going to have to deal with, if that's going to be the case. And now the defense attorney is going to have to bring into play some evidence to show that there's self-defense. And the prosecutor is going to look at all the evidence they have to refute that defense by the defense attorney.
What could it mean where it's police say she had cuts on her hands, and she had to be, Angie Mock, the suspect in this case, she had to be taken to the hospital because she had cuts on her hands. What does that tell you?
Well, here's the issue again. Are they defensive wounds? Are they wounds because of the knife that she's utilizing causing that stabbing? Because if and this is what investigators find out a lot of times, is if there's two injured parties, especially when it comes to a knifing or a stabbing, there may be defensive wounds, and there may be wounds because they've been utilizing the knife. Because of the severity of the stabbing, you may have caused injury to your own hand. So that's what they're going to do. They probably taken photos of the hands and spoken to her, because now you're going to look at the victim in this case. Does she have defensive wounds on herself? Is there any defensive wounds on her arms, on her hands? So, if the injuries are to the defendant's hands, that leans, no absolutes to this, it leans to the fact that she was the one with the initial stabbing. So what evidence that shows that the victim tried to create injury toward the defendant? And that's what they're going to look for. That's what the defense attorney is going to look for. That's why with this case, you want to make sure all the ducks in a row, that you've taken photos of the crime scene, you've interviewed all parties that you can interview, and you're finding any background, because, this doesn't happen in a vacuum. This happens around almost 8 o'clock in the morning. So was this a routine that they would meet up, or was this, I drive to the house and stab my mom? So this is what we're going to have to find out as the investigation goes forward.
Well, and the other part too is, I know and again, there's a lot that we don't know. We'll see how this case goes forward. But she stabbed her mom allegedly multiple times. Does that hurt someone's self-defense argument if there's multiple stab wounds that someone, could have stopped, but they didn't? If that's actually what's alleged here?
Yeah, when you see these type of incidents, and you see domestic incidents, there may be one stab, or multiple, and that's what will happen. But what we have to determine, the fact is, were there injuries that the defendant sustained that were considered, a way of defending herself? Where was this knife? If the body's found in the bedroom, the trail of blood from where this incident originally took place to where we find the body, or where the body is found, that's all based on the crime scene photos that you're going to obtain. If you had any information from the defendant prior, that's why those 911 calls are recorded, because you want to hear what that, in this case, the defendant said exactly to the 911 operator, because that's important. And this, the EMS that responds to the scene, what did they hear? What did she say to them? Because that is all admissible, because it's not about being in custody. It's about getting general information from the for this case.
And how hard is it to determine what is a defensive wound?
That would be a conference with, you're talking about medical staff, you're going to talk to doctors, and you're going to ask the doctors on scene, doctors at the hospital, what type of stab wounds or injuries to now the defendant's hand, and what type of injuries were sustained by the mother at this point. So there's a plethora of stuff you have to do, and it's about documentation, making sure you're clearly, concisely, accurately documenting what's being said by the doctors to you, and with the autopsy that you're going to deal with later on for the mother.
I feel like a lot of times when you look and listen to like 911 calls, and it's in hindsight of whether something's a murder or not, you may listen to it completely differently than if you didn't know what charges someone was facing. What are you listening for? And we haven't heard her 911 call yet. We don't know the tone of her voice. We don't know specifically what she said about what had happened in the home, how different it is from what she told investigators. But what are you listening for when you're listening to a 911 call, maybe before you go interview a suspect, and trying to figure out what they might say once you get to an interrogation?
Well, we're hearing that 911 call, it's recorded. You then look at it and seeing any inconsistencies when you speak to her. And that's what you're looking for. Reality is, how long did it take for investigators to get the 911 call tape and to when they spoke to her? Because now, if she's a perpetrator, if she's going to be in custody and you're going to interrogate her about this, you're going to have to read her Miranda. So I don't know. We don't know right now if she was interrogated because was she in custody when she spoke to the investigators about the 911 call, if they ever did. But they're going to, if you have an opportunity to speak to someone prior to that, you want to see the inconsistencies from what they said at the moment that they're calling to when they have the opportunity to speak to an investigator, and to then find out what they're saying is accurate. And that's what it is. You're not be able to find always that people are lying, but you're looking for inconsistencies in their stories. And that's where you refute it by evidence and facts.
Part of this story too, so Angie Mock is, I think, 47 years old. Her mom is 81. Does age ever factor into how credible someone's self-defense argument may be? I don't know the type of shape her mom was in and all of that, but it seems like for someone in their 80s to be the aggressor, that's something that could raise some red flags when you have the person who's facing charges here is 47 years old, relatively young. I've certainly never been in a situation where someone's come at me with a knife, if that's what she's alleging happened, but just how do you factor in some of the age dynamics that are at play in this story?
You look at the age, obviously, the strength and physicality of the victim at this point, the mother. That comes back to interviews with other people that know her. She has a husband who knows. Maybe he has more information about some background between the mother-daughter situation. Age does make a difference, but it comes back to, were there injuries that she stated, that the defendant at this point stated, that caused her to fight back against the mother? Because if the body's in the bedroom, where is the knife? If this was self-defense, the knife would be somewhere present. No one's talked about it. We don't know if it's there or not. They don't know if it's recovered or not. But if you're defending somebody, where was this knife recovered from, and where did it come from? Was it brought by the defendant? Was it in the kitchen? Because it's rare you see people bring knives into bedrooms. So that's where the process of this crime scene investigation, the initial crime scene being in the house, you have to determine, where did this fight start, where did this incident start, and where did it end. Did the mother crawl into it? And that's why, even though we don't have photos of where the body was at the time, it's based on the interviews of the first responders and maybe of the defendant prior to being a defendant. Like, where's the mother? I stabbed my mom. Where's your mom? These all come out. These will all come out.
In those police interviews, how are you trained to question someone when you're trying to figure out exactly what happened? What are some of the slip-ups that you see defendants make, suspects make, when they're trying to say, hey, this was self-defense, they came at me, I was just defending myself, I'm innocent? What are some of the ways that you can figure out whether or not they're actually telling the truth?
That's going back to the investigation. We've had, do people lie to the police? Absolutely. It's, we only meet these people for a few hours, maybe a few days, so we don't really know their background and what they're telling you is the truth. So you find out with the facts, and that's why the specific questions is, if she's attacking you, where were you in the room? What did she do to you? Show me what she did to you. These are things to come up. And what you find then is the inconsistencies in the story based on the facts. If she's saying she's defending herself, what kind of injuries and those hand wounds, if those are hand wounds and they're not defensive, it refutes what she's saying is self-defense. That's why. Is there any injury that she sustained that is beyond the hands, the damage to her hands from the cuts, from the knife? And that's what you're looking at. If she hit her with an object, a dangerous instrument, a remote control, whatever, a lamp, where is it? Where was that done? And right now, based on what you have, it's a lot of speculation, there doesn't seem to be many injuries facially to her from her mugshot. So I don't know what else that she has. She can claim that she was injured by her mother, and that's why she defended herself with this knife. And also, what kind of self-defense you have? Could you have run out of the room? Could you have left? I mean, how fast could an 80-year-old woman come at you with a knife if that's going to be her concept of the story? But that's why you refute those statements with facts. And if they supported by facts, then they're supported by facts. Do people kill others based on self-defense? It does happen. But it's the totality of circumstances and the facts that are there that will determine whether or not it's self-defense or not.
Yeah, we'll see how this story plays out. Obviously very sad. I mean, you look at her career when she was in television, seemed like she was a very accomplished anchor, and then what a fall from grace to now be at least accused in the murder of her own mom. Just an incredible story. Retired NYPD Detective David Sarney, it's always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you much, and stay safe.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.